Good morning, everybody. Hope you're all doing great this morning. I want to thank Lieutenant Governor Diane Primavera, who's with us. We have Senator Steve Fenberg, Speaker Julie McCluskey, Senate Majority Leader Dominic Moreno, House Majority Leader Monica Duran, and we look forward to answering all your questions about a very exciting and successful session of the General Assembly. You know, this last January, I posed the question in my State of the State, who do we want to be when Colorado turns 150 years old, just 3 years from now, our sesquicentennial? What kind of state do we want to be? How do we make sure that we're a state that creates economic opportunity, that is one of the safest states in the nation? Do we want to be known as a place that has clean air and clean water? Do we want to be a place where kids are prepared for success in life? Do we want to be a place where healthcare costs less and that we have stronger access? And Coloradans put their trust in the members of the General Assembly to tackle the pressing issues, everything from cutting property taxes to saving people money on healthcare to making Colorado safer. And I'm very hopeful that in the years ahead we'll continue to build upon our shared goal to answer that question of who we want to be at 150, laying some of the first pieces of that over this last 5 months and continuing that work. Here are some highlights of the work over the last few months. We came together around a long-term balanced solution that'll give voters a chance to use some of the Tabor surplus to prevent sharp increases in property tax bills. It'll save businesses money and making sure that we don't hurt funding for our schools and fire districts. We've created more opportunities for students of all ages to get the skills they need to fill in-demand jobs and earn a living while they support their families through apprenticeships and earn and learn models. The class of 2024 graduates will be receiving a $1,500 scholarship, but it's a lot more innovative than just the words scholarship entails. Yes, you can use it for what some of you think of as a scholarship, meaning if you go to CU or CSU or Mines or any of our fine institutions, I guess you can use it, to go somewhere else too, out of state. But more importantly, you can use it for apprenticeships, for skills academies, for all of these kinds of ways to get the skills you need to succeed in life that traditional scholarships aren't applicable for. So it's really a pathway to success for our students. We also made it, based on the success of our initial program that made it free to train to be an EMT or a nurse practitioner, we expanded that successfully to law enforcement and firefighting and construction and so many other fields that will help people get the skills they need to fill jobs that are open today, earn a good living, protect us, power our economy. Really proud of the workforce innovation, and of course, we are so proud of the record investment in our schools, raising per pupil funding 10.6%. Just what that means is, for a classroom of 22 students, that's an increase of over $22,000. For classroom resources, for better teacher pay, for smaller class size, for enrichment programs like the arts that had to be cut during some of the lean years. This is a record increase in education funding for the state of Colorado, and the students will benefit. We're also moving closer to our goal of 100% renewable energy. I want to thank the legislature for passing a historic clean energy tax credit package to accelerate the use of EVs, save people money. The cost of electric vehicles will come down by $5,000 with this package. That saves people money on getting an electric vehicle. Remember, about 12 or 13% of the vehicles sold in the state are electric vehicles. That's only going up. Reducing that cost by $5,000 is money in people's pockets. Electric bike rebates, $500. Rebates for heat pumps, as well as some around some of the exciting new technologies of tomorrow. A lot of the work this session, and I do say work because the legislators involved put a lot of work into it, whether it's Brianna Titone or Chris Hansen and others, really setting up the state for the future of the hydrogen economy, for geothermal energy, repurposing the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission, as well as the elements that are reflected in the tax credit package. This was not easy work, but it prepares our state for clean energy innovation, which will ensure that we can have reliable, low-cost energy for the people of Colorado. And of course, one issue that we know we need to continue to press forward on is housing. People know that I am here to fight to save you money, whether it's on health care, whether it's by reducing taxes, or whether it's on housing. And of course, we have a lot of work ahead to better protect the rights of homeowners, to make Colorado more affordable to purchase or rent a home. We need to make sure that we are able to rise to the occasion to change the status quo, which simply isn't working for too many Coloradans, whether it's a senior looking to downsize, whether it's a young family looking to have a home close to where their job is, and of course appreciate the work of the State House in passing a real workable solution to reduce housing costs by a sizable margin, and we'll look forward to continuing that work ahead. As you know, in my first term we set out to universal preschool and kindergarten. Of course, we didn't get preschool done in the first year. Preschool starts here in my first year of my second term. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to save people money on housing in a shorter time than it took us to get universal preschool done. Very proud of universal preschool. Over 90% of families got their first choice, and there are many openings available for families who are late or who have procrastinated or not registered yet for their 4-year-old. So please visit the Universal Preschool site and you can look at the options for your 4-year-old today. I do want to thank the broad coalition who came together to help address housing costs. Of course, people know that I'm deeply committed to addressing this issue, and will continue to prioritize reducing costly barriers and red tape that stand in the way of solving this issue. We know the work doesn't end here. Over the next few weeks, I look forward to one of the most fun times as governor, and that's visiting all the parts of our great state, from Grand Junction to Fort Morgan to Pueblo to Denver to Boulder. Look forward to getting out and around to sign so many great bills in so many areas that will really improve the quality of life for Coloradans. Much of the work, as usual, bipartisan, thoughtful. Some of the thoughtful areas that we're moving forward are sometimes areas the legislature agrees on, either unanimously or near unanimously. And those are practical, good ideas brought to legislators by their constituents, acted on, and I certainly look forward to fulfilling my final part of that process, evaluating the bills and signing the vast majority across the state of Colorado. With that, I am so happy to introduce the Speaker, Speaker Julie McCluskey.
Good morning, everyone. Great to see you all here today. I want to thank Governor Polis, our Senate leaders, and my dear partner, Majority Leader Duran, for the great work that we've accomplished this year. You know, on opening day, I asked lawmakers to do everything we could to help Coloradans live their own individual dreams. And this session, from improving public education with a record investment in our schools and teachers and students, to reducing the cost of health care and prescription drugs, this session delivered real results on the issues that matter to Coloradans. The legislation we passed to protect access to abortion, support our workforce, and save people on money on housing. There's so much to celebrate. But many of you know I spent years in public schools, and education is near and dear to my heart. We increased per pupil funding by over $1,000 per student, putting resources directly into our classrooms, making sure that we can maintain small class sizes, increase teacher pay, and ensure that students have what they need to thrive. Some people never thought we would eliminate the BS factor, but no offense, Gov, we beat your budget. We were able to increase the buy-down of the BS factor and make a commitment to permanently eliminate the budget stabilization factor next year. We increased funding for our schools by over $650 million. This is remarkable progress and unimaginable just a few years ago. I also want to say that I lift up now our rural schools. We were able to commit another $30 million just to our small rural schools who struggle to recruit and retain teachers and provide a robust public education program for their students. I'm also proud of the work that I did to help support our workforce. My colleagues joined me in passing free pathways for students to earn a credential through our community colleges and pursue careers in industries and business areas where we are seeing such a workforce shortage. I'm incredibly grateful to the leadership of our Education Committee, from Chair Barbara McLaughlin to Representatives Lukens, Martinez, Kipp, Young, Assistant Majority Leader Bacon, Representatives Daphne Michelson, Janae, and Hamrick. Those representatives worked hard to deliver on the promises of our agenda to improve student learning. And as the first woman speaker from the Western Slope, I am particularly privileged to see the House tackle so many issues important to our rural and Western Slope communities. Everything from improving quality in mobile home parks, boosting our ag workforce, protecting water resources from landfills that threaten to leak hazardous materials into our fresh water, improve wildfire mitigation, suppression, and response, help farmers and ranchers save money on equipment repairs with Colorado's first in the nation right to repair law. And my many thanks to Representative Titone for her fierce leadership on that front. And we put our state on a path to finding a sustainable and collaborative solution to address the Colorado River water crisis. As I close, I just want to say how truly proud I am of the work that we've done for Coloradans all across the state. We work to boost rural economies, protect our environment, and pass bipartisan legislation that will uplift people all across our communities, our state. Thank you all, and it is my profound pleasure to introduce the leader of our Senate, President Fenberg.
Well, thank you all for being here this morning. It's good to be with all of you today as we discuss and wrap up the work that we did over the last 120 days. Now that the dust has started to settle, we can actually take a step back and look at all of what we accomplished. Democrats entered this session with a mandate from Colorado voters. We were asked to tackle the big issues in folks' lives and respond with equally big solutions. And I think we did just that. From building safer, more affordable communities, to protecting our fundamental freedoms, to tackling climate change, we delivered real results for Coloradans. I'd like to take a few minutes to highlight a few areas of progress that I am particularly proud of. Along with probably every single legislator in this building, I heard from so many of my constituents about the sky-high prices of their utility bills. It was a serious problem, especially this past winter. And that's why I teamed up with my colleagues in the House to create the Joint Select Committee on Rising Utility Rates. We took a deep dive into the ways of the ways that the state regulates investor-owned utilities, and we came up with solutions to turn down the volatility of energy bill costs in the long and in the short term. Our bill will improve transparency, hold utility companies more accountable to the ratepayers they serve, while better aligning utility companies and Coloradans' interests and expectations about their energy service. Most important of all, it'll save people money on their energy bills starting almost immediately, which is something I think everybody can be thankful for. But that's not all we did on the energy front, of course. We invested in new energy technologies like carbon capture, hydrogen, and geothermal. We implemented millions of dollars of new tax credits. to speed up our decarbonization efforts and continue to be the leader that Colorado has always been on the energy front. And we're lowering Colorado's greenhouse gas emissions through reduction targets, electrification incentives, and climate-aware investments. These efforts and more will go a long way in cementing Colorado's place as a leader on climate policy and will help us achieve our bold climate goals that we have set out for ourselves. But this session, of course, we also grappled with tragedy. Like too many others, this session was marred by gun violence. Just weeks before session began, we lost 5 lives in a shooting at Club Q in Colorado Springs. In the span of 1 month, students and teachers at Denver East were subject to gun violence not once, but twice. And of course, that doesn't include the everyday instances of gun violence that we know fly under the radar, but leave holes in our families and our communities that can never be healed. We grieved with our neighbors in the Springs and students and teachers at Denver East. We grieve every single death that's the result of gun violence. But in the face of these tragedies, we did not throw up our hands and fail to act. We acted. We fought hard to pass a critical suite of gun violence prevention bills. We raised the age to purchase a firearm to 21. We removed overly broad protections for the gun industry. We strengthened our historic red flag law that we passed several years ago. We established a 3-day waiting period when purchasing a firearm. And we cracked down on unserialized, untraceable ghost guns. These are common sense, life-saving measures that make sense for the moment we find ourselves in. And I'm proud to have gotten them signed into law and across the finish line. There's so much to be proud of from this past session. So many people worked incredibly hard to get hundreds of bills across the finish line to deliver real results for Coloradans. I think after all of this work, we all deserve a little bit of a break, but it's going to have to be a short one, because before we know it, we have to get back to work and have conversations with voters about this November's election. That's because we're sending a historic proposition to the ballot to make major long and short-term property tax reductions while protecting funding for services like schools, libraries, and fire districts, and everything else that our communities depend on. And we have the opportunity to distribute Tabor refunds at a flat, more equitable rate, just like we did last year. Because of that work, 77% of taxpayers, including everyone who brings in less than $100,000 a year, will get an increase on their refunds this year. That means more support for folks to fill up their tank, put groceries on the table. That is what we have been doing for the last 120 days. Support for people who need it. Measures to make our communities safer and stronger. Meaningful change for Coloradans. That work never ends, and we will continue the work in the interim and next session, of course. Thank you for all of your time this morning, for your work and standing with us and being with us just about every single day of these past 120 days. Now, I'd like to introduce my good friend, the Majority Leader of the House, Monica Duran.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I must admit, without a doubt, this has been one of the most impactful sessions in recent memory. We had one of the most diverse caucuses in recent history, we all know that, with a remarkable number of women serving in leadership. As a Latina in leadership, I was proud to see how we fought for inclusion of all voices throughout this session. Our diversity is our strength, and as a result, we passed legislation that represents all Coloradans whose voices have too often been left behind. For many years, I have wanted to pass legislation to increase the age to purchase a firearm to 21. This was personal to me. I faced intimidation with a firearm from a partner when I was just 19 years old. At 19, that was awfully young to have gone through something so personal. I am a responsible firearm owner, and I support Second Amendment rights. but I also recognize that common sense policies will save lives and are necessary. Raising the age to purchase a firearm is obviously a step forward, and one that I am proud to have been responsible for. Raising the age to purchase a firearm will reduce youth access to guns. Easy access to firearms is leading to high suicide rates and gun violence that we can prevent by making it harder for young people who don't always make the best decisions when it comes to purchasing a firearm. We also worked hard to improve public safety and prevent crime before it happens. We extended the Safer Streets Grant Program, created the Office for School Safety, and passed legislation to crack down on auto thefts. I'm particularly proud of our efforts to support victims of crimes by increasing funding for critical services, improving how courts handle domestic violence cases, studying judicial training, and victim notification procedures. The legislation we pass this session will make our communities safer by preventing gun violence and advancing proven strategies that we know work, and they work to reduce crimes. This year we worked hard, we worked smarter, and we got a lot of work done to deliver real results for all Coloradans, and I thank you. And with that, I want to kick it off to our Senate Majority Leader, Moreno.
Good morning, everyone. Day 121, the trauma healing begins. For those of you that I was with just a few short hours ago, if you're operating a little slower than normal this morning, there are still leftover refreshments in my office. It's a pleasure to be with you to just close up the 2023 legislative session. Just want to take a moment to really thank everyone who made the session possible, the nonpartisan staff, the incredible caucus staff that make this place run. We really couldn't do this work without them. I'm particularly proud of how the Senate operated in a very bipartisan fashion this year, making sure that priorities still got across the finish line, but not in a way that diminished anyone. We really worked together with our colleagues to make sure that that happened. And we know that all throughout this, we have remained laser focused on the issues that matter most to Colorado families. We know housing is far too expensive in our state, and it's pricing folks out of their communities. So we passed bills to lower the cost of housing, to save families and businesses billions of dollars in property tax, to help more folks, especially those on fixed incomes, stay in their homes. We also work to protect renters in our state, advancing critical protections, including laws that reduce barriers to housing eligibility, saving renters money on rental applications, and protecting lower income folks who rely on safety net programs from being evicted. This was a session where we started a lot of conversations. We maybe didn't quite get around to finishing all of them, but we started the conversation. It was a really important role that this session played in lining up the opportunity to come back and pass strong legislation to make sure that we address our housing affordability crisis. We also work to save people money on their health, on health care, by lowering the cost of prescription drugs and improving access to behavioral health care for our youth, protecting consumers from getting trapped in endless and confusing spiral of medical debt, and expanding reproductive health care, which is something that I worked on personally with my colleague, Senator Lisa Cutter, to make sure that abortion access is protected and covered for every Coloradan. I'm proud of the work to shine the light on the issue of eating disorders in Colorado. That was the first time the legislature really took up that issue in a meaningful way, and we'll be continuing that work in the future. I could go on and on about the successes from this session. There were many, but I'll leave you with this. The last 120 days have been transformative for the people of Colorado. We came here to lower costs, and I think we successfully did that. We came to address the climate crisis, and I think we did that. We rolled up our sleeves, we got to work, and I'm proud of the results that we delivered for our state. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. We'll be happy to take some questions. Who's calling on them?
Duran. Yeah, Governor, the backers of your housing proposal, your signature issue for the 2023 session, it appears that they may have underestimated the opposition. What lessons do you take from the collapse of negotiations, particularly in the last week or so, that you'll take into the next round of conversations on this?
Yeah, I don't think anybody underestimated the opposition. Changing the status quo is hard, and I think the first step is acknowledging that the status quo isn't working. I think that there's a growing consensus that that's the case. People that simply can't afford to live in our great state. And changing things is never easy, and it doesn't happen all at once. Again, I applaud the House for passing a meaningful measure. I think that another area that we need to work on is the middle housing piece, lower cost homes for purchase, which was in the Senate version reported out of the Housing Committee. So there's a lot of work ahead, and I think that this is, when we reflect on who we are on 150th birthday, fundamentally, we want to be a state where people can afford to live and thrive near their place, near their kids' school, reducing traffic, improving air quality, supporting more water efficiency to reduce the pressure on our ag areas and prevent the need for buy and dry policies that destroy our rural economy. So certainly we look forward to continuing the work on this critical issue that Majority Leader Moreno mentioned and so many of us care deeply about, and it's such an important part of the quality of life here in Colorado, as well as our economic competitiveness as a state.
Governor, Republicans walked out of the House yesterday because they felt like they weren't part of the negotiations on the property tax bill. Do you regret not involving them in that process? And also, do you think it was appropriate for the House to vote on that bill without them in the chamber?
Well, for House issues, I'll go to the Speaker. I would say I'm always happy to talk to and hear from any legislator about any topic. I meet regularly with both Democratic and Republican leadership, and for anything about the House, I'll turn it over to the Speaker.
I'm curious what you think, Governor. Sorry, I've already spoken with Speaker.
About the House, I leave it up to the Speaker.
Do you think it's going to hurt your effort at the ballot in November, for instance?
Well, I don't think walking out on a body is polite. There were times when I served in a legislative body in Congress that I wasn't happy with what the majority party was doing, but I never walked out. I, attended State of the State speeches, State of the Nation speeches by President Trump. I was there. Some of my colleagues walked out. I certainly understand the frustration, but no, I don't think that's something that is consistent with the spirit of democracy, and I think it's their right. They can walk out, and I had colleagues in Congress that walked out at different times. I got that, but personally, I always thought that it's better to be there and be heard than to be at a bar somewhere. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't recall that we had talked about this, John, and I do want to make it clear. I'm deeply disappointed colleagues walked out of the House last night. We are hired to do one specific thing in this General Assembly, and that is to cast a vote. Yes, I hear the concerns about process, but at the end of the day, our responsibility is to represent our constituents with our voice through the voting process. The Republicans made a choice early yesterday, and I am disappointed. I am committed to working with our minority party and making sure that we all get back to the table to do good work for this state next session. Thank you.
Marshall, Governor, on the identical taper refunds issue, one of the bill sponsors told me that was a bill they were going to do at the beginning of the year regardless, just standalone, but had to hold it to be part of the property tax package. Why is it that equal taper refunds and, in a way, equitable taper refunds has to be traded in exchange for a vote on the property tax ballot issue?
Well, again, I personally believe the pathway to a more progressive TABOR refund mechanism is through an income tax cut, which I've been a strong supporter of. I was, of course, supported the permanent income tax cuts at the ballot, which passed overwhelmingly. But one of the only downsides of that is it eliminated a Tabor refund mechanism, which in my opinion was the most important one economically, which is the 0.13% temporary income tax reduction. I, of course, would support more progressive distribution of Tabor refunds as long as we also included the temporary income tax refund mechanism. So that was not done this session, so there was no bill that permanently changed that and put the income tax back. So instead it's going to the voters.
Governor, the tax measure raises the Tabor cap by potentially billions of dollars at the end of the decade, but local districts have complained that not a lot of that goes to their part of that bill. How much of raising the Tabor cap is about property taxes, and how much is really about growing schools funding, growing state funding?
Well, I think, you know, what you see is a reasonable balanced solution. It's looking at the ledgers of the state and saying we have a big enough Tabor surplus where we can afford to take less revenue in on property tax. Now, the challenge is these are different entities because the property tax is generally a bunch of districts. So if you're cutting theirs, at the same time, it makes sense to have the discussion, how do you make sure you're not actually cutting fire services or schools funding? You also can't always obviously count on the kind of increases in property tax revenue the state had the last 2 years. There's been periods of time where it's been flat. You remember the 08-09 recession where assessments went down for a period. So, you know, the state is in a healthier fiscal situation because we have a much more diverse set of revenue. We have sales tax, we have income tax, we have many different fees. So a downturn in real estate, the state is in a stronger position to overcome, but many of our local districts rely 100% on real estate. So the legislature got together and they said, look, how do we balance all these things? How do we say we have a large Tabor surplus? How do we provide a property tax cut, then use some of that revenue, not all, to backfill the district? So to be clear, the school districts are held harmless. We value education investment. Other kinds of special districts above a certain level are held harmless up to a certain level. And I think that's a reasonable way to say, look, we can do all these things. We can show a strong and healthy surplus. We can reduce property taxes. By reducing property taxes, it reduces revenue of many districts. We can backfill some of that to make sure that we don't jeopardize our safety.
So growing school funding, growing state budget is not a principal objective of this?
Well, I think that providing property tax relief is the main objective, and there's various ideas on how to do that. This is the proposal that was able to get the support of the legislature to move forward and provide voters with a way that without having to worry about devastating school funding and only making modest potential cuts to other kinds of special district funding. They can get a significant property tax cut that would take I think with all the property tax cuts, it would take the average increase from just over $1,000 to about $356. I have the numbers here. So yeah, the increase in property tax for an average home would go from about $1,038 to $354 with a combination of the property tax cuts that are passed and the ones that are on the ballot this November. And I think my goal in whatever we do on property tax has always been provide relief, and then also replace Gallagher and address the inequities of Gallagher. And so let me talk about those second two, because sometimes they don't get enough discussion. Provide immediate relief gets a lot of discussion, as it should, and people are going to make up their minds based on that. Replace Gallagher is the truth in taxation mechanism. This is proven to work. It's been in place in a number of states. It caps the increase in your home value at the rate of inflation and creates a procedure whereby a local board can allow it to float up more if they choose, accountable to the people that elect them. Very sound mechanism for keeping property taxes low over time. Addressing the inequities of Gallagher, as I've always said, and I voted, of course, for that initiative. I also, like many, wish it had been repeal and replace concurrently. It wasn't. This replace piece is coming later, better late than never. But one of the things that Gallagher did poorly is it kept increasing the commercial rate, the non-residential rate, which makes Colorado businesses less competitive. This measure would help address that by reducing the commercial rate for that all small businesses that have land, all businesses that have land pay by over 10% over the next decade. Another thing I like about it is it makes the homestead tax credit portable. Right now you have families, seniors, living in their home, and under current law, they face a higher tax bill by downsizing. I know it's counterintuitive, bizarre, but that's the case. So if a senior lives in a home that's worth, $700,000 and they want to downsize to an apartment that's $500,000 and free up their larger home for a family, they actually pay a higher tax bill under today's law. This initiative would fix that, so they can take that homestead exemption tax credit with them, and that what makes intuitive sense to all of us, of course, you should pay a smaller tax bill if you go from a $700,000 home to a $500,000 home or apartment. I mean, that's just common sense, but that's the opposite of what we have in place right now for our seniors.
We'll go Sean and Seth.
Can you speak a little louder? Thank you.
Our job is to be a voice for the people that we represent down here. Republicans say they really felt like the voice was silenced through this use of Rule 16 yesterday, and also Rule 14 throughout the session. And then I'm not sure, I still don't understand why these two are coupled, these two, the tabor with Marshall's question and property tax. So maybe someone wants to take a crack at that.
I'll go first. Thank you, Sean, for the question. Mid-session, we began to recognize that what was happening in our chamber was no longer respectful and productive. Filibustering and delay tactics by having bills read at length is not why we were voted into office. We were voted into office to consider and debate policy. At the time we invoked House Rule 14, we wanted to drive more productive conversations. And I'm really pleased to say that when we made that shift, because of the pressures of time, we were able to work through debate in a much more meaningful way. The reality is we only have 120 days. I bet most of you are pretty relieved to only have 120 days of us. But as we are facing the end of the clock, and recognizing that we need to deliver on the expectation that Coloradans have for us, particularly on a piece of legislation that is so significant in reducing property taxes, we knew we had to move more quickly. We spoke with minority leadership. We wanted to provide time for them to speak. They walked out before the clock had expired, and that was incredibly unfortunate. I am disappointed that last night happened the way it did, but as I said earlier, I'm looking forward to a reset with our colleagues and getting back to work in an honest and earnest way.
I'll just add to your second question, Sean, a little bit. It may appear that these are politically connected, but they're actually policy connected. And by that, when we introduced the property tax bill, there were questions. How is this going to impact all the different types of people that either rent or own, or people who are seniors that get the senior homestead exemption, et cetera? And there were a lot of questions on how it impacts everybody. This property tax proposal changed. It evolved in the Senate and then in the House, and then we concurred with some of those changes in the Senate just yesterday. But the second bill, 1311, that was introduced is connected to the conversation. It's a comprehensive proposal. We wanted to make it clear that if we are going to be talking about property taxes, that we provide obviously meaningful real relief to property owners, but also to those who rent those properties. And that's why we changed the assessment rate to be the same for whether it's a rental property or an owner-occupied property. And it's also why we had the conversation around flattening tabor refunds, because we want to make sure that money that is used from that pot of money, the surplus, it doesn't negatively impact people who are renters, but instead make the whole package more comprehensive and beneficial for everybody, whether you're a property owner at the high level, low level, or a renter. So they are connected from a policy sense. It could have, but they're connected. So it's a conversation around using some of the surplus funds to be able to provide that property tax relief. And so for us, it was a connected conversation. To be honest, we couldn't fit the Tabor refund aspect in the title of the original bill, and so that's why it's a separate bill that was connected to it. But the intention was to have it be part of one policy.
Seth, Jesse, Governor, you talked a lot about housing leaders at the state level, legislators said this year of housing, or in the last year. Can you hear me? I'm sorry. Year of housing, 213 didn't get over the line. A lot of progressive housing measures didn't get over the line. Do you feel the legislature did enough to meaningfully address housing affordability for renters specifically during this?
Well, certainly we can, celebrate the success of 2 of the 3 initiatives we rolled out around More Housing Now. One was Representative Lindstadt's bill around making sure that communities don't impose caps on new home construction, which shift the burden and higher cost housing onto other communities. That sets off a, many ways, race to the bottom on housing that raises the costs across an entire metropolitan area. So I certainly look forward to signing that part of the More Housing Now package. We also boosted the public-private partnership effort around unlocking state and local owned land for the purposes of housing, and I'm very confident that will result in additional projects, whether it's hundreds or thousands of new units. It'll certainly make a difference for the families that live in them. But of course, on the big things, we have a lot of work to do, a lot of good discussions, strong bills that passed the Senate Housing Committee, the House as a whole. I think there's more we need to do around middle housing, again, in particular, to make sure that there's more homes at a lower cost that people can afford to buy and build equity. Yes, a place to live, affordable rent, critical, but of course that dream of owning a home and building wealth is also getting further and further from reality for too many Colorado families, and we need to change the status quo to be able to get that changed.
Well, I mean, the growth gap, the local 213 as well, I mean, these are like years long. It's going to take years to feel the effects of that, right? That's construction and development. So for renters, people who have been saying that you know, what the legislature do this year to provide that?
Well, I recently signed a bill that saves renters money on application fees by allowing you to repurpose your background check and an application across as many rental applications as you can do. Again, I think overall the cost of rent is a reflection of housing supply and demand is a good thing. People want to live in Colorado. Bad news is the secret's out. So we need more supply, and that's the work we need to continue to do. As long as there's more people that want to live here than we have available housing units, the prices can continue to go up for rent or for purchase. And again, we don't want to reverse that trend by being less attractive to people. In fact, we want to make Colorado even better, safer, lower property taxes, strong economy, great education system. So the other way to address that is by increasing supply, and the work continues on that.
Yeah, to go back to the opposition HH measures, the fact that we went through it across 3 days, through a lot of conversation, previously a lot of conflict in the chamber, including with some Democrats, as how fast it was going. Was that appropriate?
Look, I think there are always bills that come down to the wire every session. In the past few sessions, it actually has also been about property taxes. We, in some ways, had to wait, and we wanted to wait before we really understood the severity and the complexity of the problem. And so once the assessors came out and painted that picture for us in a way, that's when it was obvious that we needed to sort of press go and get it done before we could get to the 120th day. So we had conversations. We did a lot of stakeholding with either districts that are impacted or schools and educators and advocates. And we came up with the comprehensive package that we came up with, and we obviously listened to feedback because the bill and the policy changed quite a bit in the final days. But our goal was to get something in front of voters so they can make the decision. Keep in mind, we aren't actually making any major policy changes by passing those bills. That will only happen if voters say yes in November. And so for us, it was important to get something in front of voters so that they can make the decision on providing that relief to themselves in the short term.
Jesse, then Marshall, last question.
Two questions. Going back to the Tabor question, both of you now call the 6-tier system less equitable than flat rate refunds. So why do Coloradans have to reduce property taxes to move to a more equitable refund system? And then Governor asked, just curious if you looked at any legislation that you're pursuing for vetoes. Do you anticipate any vetoes? Do you have any specifics on what those vetoes are?
Well, as Senator Fenberg said, I think that the Tabor refund mechanism was part of the discussion around property tax relief. So when you just provide property tax relief, it helps people that are homeowners, and then you say, what do you do about people that are not homeowners? You might have an accompanying change to the Tabor refund mechanism. So I think that was the basis of his answer, that the two are related. Again, I'm always open to discussions of changing the Tabor refund mechanism, but for me, those discussions begin with income tax cuts, and then they go on to include earned income tax credit, flat refunds, child tax credits, any other mechanisms that people want to bring into the discussion. We always evaluate every bill from a legal perspective and a policy perspective, and we have 30 days to do that, and we've begun that process already.
Marshall, last question.
Well, Jesse kind of took the wind out of myself. This is for a coworker who couldn't make it, Governor, who has done some reporting on the reintroduction of wolves. And I was hoping
On the what?
The reintroduction of
Uh-huh.
wolves. And I was hoping we could end the suspense on Senate Bill 256. Will you be vetoing the bill that, in essence, delay what voters have said they want?
Well, I mean, look, we're here to talk about what we did, and obviously we will certainly be talking about that, but there shouldn't be a lot of suspense on that one, Marshall. The Department of Natural Resources testified against it. The legal experts inform us would delay the very 10J that the proponents are seeking. So we want to honor the will of the voters, avoid delays to the 10J process that will allow us maximum state management control of the experimental wolf population. And of course, formal announcements on bills will be made after we conduct the full legal and political analysis. But it's certainly very clear, where our agencies were on a number of bills, and I don't think people will be surprised.
Just one last question. Can you just give a reaction to the legislature not reauthorizing CCJJ?
Yeah, so I'm disappointed that the formal process from the legislature will discontinue. This is a process where we bring together constituents in public safety to make Colorado safer and address inequities in the criminal justice system. So prosecutors, defense attorneys, law enforcement. We absolutely are working on a plan to continue that very important deliberative work, which is absolutely critical to the work of making Colorado one of the 10 safest states. And I'm confident that we'll find a way to continue that work even without the legislative reauthorization.
Are you going to use an executive order to create a similar panel?
Well, again, we're looking now at how we can continue that important work. And so with the sunset of the formal group, we will in the coming weeks announce the plan moving forward for how these thoughtful discussions around reforming our criminal justice system and improving public safety in Colorado will be able to continue.
Governor, the COVID order ends tomorrow. Any thoughts on the emergency declaration ending? It's been quite a chapter of your...
Yeah, so the last piece of that, the reason there was one, is it had to do with Medicaid provisions. The legislature has passed, and I've signed, the final bill that makes the adjustment, so there is now no need for any continuation of that emergency order. So that's, it lasted longer than many of us would have liked, but that's because, of course, we weren't going to eliminate it for the sake of eliminating it when there was money that we were pulling down under it. So that is not expected to be renewed, and the fiscal piece of that has been fixed in a piece of legislation that I signed, I think, a week ago. Thank you.
Pandemic just being over?
Well, that happened a while ago, John. We moved away from all of the operative public health orders, and obviously we have a highly effective vaccine. If you haven't been vaccinated or need a booster, I encourage you to get it. My family, like many, had COVID a few months ago, but it was really nothing, and we credit both the prior infection and our vaccine for that. So I think people are in a much better spot, and we encourage those who are medically vulnerable to get vaccinated for flu in the fall, of course, to make sure they get their boosters for COVID. Our hospital capacity, our North Star in this process, is not at all in jeopardy and hasn't been for some time. And we look forward to continuing to do our best to make sure we get the very best information out to the people of Colorado about how they can protect themselves from infectious diseases.
Thank you, everyone. That's all we have time for. Thank you.
Thank you.